Evening, everyone. I want to welcome you back to the Holland Land Office Museum.
Hello.
And you get to put up with me the entire night, so I won't do any introductions because I think you all know who I am.
Yeah.
But have a very special topic tonight. We are going to talk about Land Office Day in 1894, or when we became a museum. So this year, we just celebrated our 130th birthday. So this is our big celebration to tell you how that all came to be. It's a pretty interesting story. I call October 13th, 1894 Batavia's biggest party. And it was all because of the building that we're in tonight. So we will jump right in. There we go. So, how do we get from the land office to a museum? There's several steps along the way and changes in ownership. From about 1840 to 1852, it was still a land office, just not for the Holland Land Company. Farmers Land Trust was one of them that took over, but several land companies operated out of our building here. And then from 1852 to 1880, it was a schoolhouse for Mrs. Bryan's Seminary for Young Ladies. So Mrs. Bryan opened up a finishing school here in Batavia, and her students were from all over the area and came here to learn how to proper etiquette for ladies of that time, arithmetic, reading, and writing skills, as well as ways to catch the eye of a passing young man. And they lived in the former Ellicott Mansion, which was across the street from us here, but did their classes in the land office. And they liked it especially for the music classes because of the thick stone walls kept all the noisy Main Street out, so they could hear really well. And then from 1880 to 1888, it was the Free Methodist Church. So they really only had half the building, but it would be the far half away from us, the larger room, because they took out the center wall to make that their place of worship, so they even put pews in there and everything. And then for approximately 5 years, or maybe a little less, it was actually small apartments, basically tenement style. So imagine that, Batavia having a absentee landlord. It happened here too.
Yeah.
So we get to 1893, and the land office is in a pretty rough spot. This picture is actually of the land office in 1890. And the previous one is when it was Mrs. Bryan's Seminary in the 1860s. So this is actually the earliest photograph we know of the land office building. What?
Brian, when was the building built?
1815.
1850.
So in the 1890s, things had gone severely downhill, and the village elders were seriously considering knocking it down. It had become so dilapidated, things were falling off of it, there were broken windows, the doors weren't even locked, you could just wander right in, and there was water damage, all the things that an old building goes through when it's not properly maintained. And you can see the vegetation and overgrowth is considerable in that picture. So by 1893, there is a serious call to have one of the oldest buildings in the county be demolished. And luckily, citizens of Batavia decided they were not going to let that happen. And they were going to band together in order to preserve the building. So our first person that really takes up the call is John Kennedy, who was the superintendent of Batavia Village Schools. And he's really the first voice to call for the preservation of the building. He was part of the Upton post, the GAR post, Grand Army of the Republic. And at the meeting in July of 1893 is when he first makes the call to have volunteers and people support the cause of saving the land office. The problem is they have to pay off the mortgage in order to buy the building to save it. So they have to raise a whopping $1,850.
A lot of money.
And they were trying to come up with different ways to do that. They eventually settle on Kennedy's idea of having a membership drive, which we still do every year, but this one was really important. And you could, for $10, you could become a member of the Saving of the Land Office. And within a few months, they had sold $500 worth of memberships.
Wow.
So they were getting pretty close. And this membership would eventually get them $1,000 out of that $1,850. The other big proponent early on is Mary Richmond. Now this is Mary when she's much younger than in 1893, but it's the one picture that I have of her that you can actually see who it is. So she was the widow of Dean Richmond, who had died in 1866. He was president of the New York Central Railroad and left over $2 million in the 1860s to Mary and the family, and she doubles it. So she is worth several $1 million by the 1890s. Had put a lot of money into the local industry, was an early investor in Wire Plow, Johnson Harvester, all those big names. She was an early investor. And she really becomes a champion of saving the Holland Land Office building. So much that, in fact, when the Holland Purchase Historical Society is formed in January of 1894, she is elected the first president. But it's not just those two people that are the ones committed. This really trickles down to a true community effort, people of all walks and ages banding together to try to save what they consider the local landmark. And it even gets to the Batavia High School. And yes, this is a newspaper clipping picture of the entire senior class of 1894. Much smaller than today. And you can see it's mostly young ladies, but the senior class decided to take up the challenge of raising some money for the land office, and they actually raised the last $350. So don't say young people can't accomplish anything, right here you go. And they did that in just a few months. So it was their contribution at the end which pushed them over the top and allowed the Historical Society to pay off the mortgage to purchase the building, and thus saving it from the wrecking ball. So a little bit about the Historical Society that is formed and still operates the museum today. So for those of you who are members of the museum, you are actually a member of the Holland Purchase Historical Society. So you are carrying on the tradition. Started way back in 1894. So, as I mentioned, Mary Richmond is elected as the first president. However, Mary passes away in 1895, so shortly after the existence. And her daughter, Adelaide Richmond Kenny, is made the next president. And she continues on that role for about another 10 years until she passes away. The other officers, you have William Watson as the vice president, Herbert Woodward as recording secretary, Arthur Clark as the corresponding secretary and librarian, and Levin McIntyre as treasurer. So it's kind of interesting, you have a woman being the president and all the other board members are men.
That was good.
But Mary laid down the law and she was in charge. So, and the mission, which is different than the mission today, and I'll talk about sort of where the impetus sort of lies for this and how I will say it's somewhat misguided, but there's a different focus in 1894. So the mission is the discovery, procuring, and preservation of whatever related to the Holland Purchase lands and all lands that have been owned by Robert Morris in Western New York. So the early Historical Society put a big emphasis on Robert Morris. Now Morris owned the land before the land company, and he sold it to the Holland Land Company, but that's really the extent of his involvement. But they wanted to really harken back to Robert Morris because he was a founding father. He signed the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. He was a name people could recognize, so they put much importance on it because people put importance on that era of American figures. So the land office was operated by the Historical Society up until 1937. We took a short hiatus of about a decade, though the artifacts were still managed in the building, but the school district actually ran the building, or owned the building. And then came back in the late 1940s, this time owned by the county, so we are now the county museum as well, but the Historical Society continues to run the museum as such. So the Historical Society owns all of the artifacts within the building and manages the collection and everything that we do with the collection. So I work for the Historical Society. So the museum is purely the operating arm of the Historical Society. And this is a picture of the first group of the Historical Society. Mary Richmond's dead center right there. And that was taken in 1894, right after they celebrated the dedication. And mostly women again that were the ones, the driving force behind this. And it's important to note the contributions by women in terms of saving local history, not just here, but across the United States. The first example is Mount Vernon, and it was the Ladies Society of Mount Vernon that actually saves it and raises the money. So it just seemed to click with middle to upper class women at that time of preserving the past, which us men at the time, I don't think were really thinking looking backwards, but more looking forwards. That's just how the brains were working. But thank God for those ladies, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So,
Brian, what's that cable going across the top of? Did they have electrical cable?
so that is actually
Cable,
that's a telephone line.
Oh.
This is just before we really get electricity here in Batavia, and at any large
They
extent.
had telephone service.
Yes, yes. And there was still telegraph service at the time. This is before it exclusively goes to telephone. Yes, Mary?
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Continue.
I was done, so.
Okay. Was Adelaide Richmond Kenny, would she be a sister or a daughter to Mary?
Daughter.
Daughter,
Yeah.
okay,
So 2 generations of Richmonds were the first presidents
okay.
of the society. So
It
this,
says right in front of her name, I missed it.
that's okay. That's all right. Yeah, so this is what we looked like when we first became a museum. So now to the fun part, the big party. So October 13th, 1894 was designated as the day that the museum would become a historic site. The land office would officially be saved, and everybody could have a big old party.
In London.
So it was a Saturday, so almost Friday the 13th in October. But Saturday, October 13th, and it was a day much like earlier today, where it downpoured the entire day. But thousands of people still turned out for the event. They actually had a parade down Main Street. That's what this is a picture of. And there's speculation, it's approximation, that probably between 2,000 and 4,000 people showed up in Batavia that day.
Wow.
So the party started at the Hotel Richmond,
Yeah.
made its way here to the land office, and eventually ended up at what was called the Blind School Park, but that's Centennial Park today.
That was a party.
So they traveled all over. And this was such a big deal that we had even some dignitaries show up.
Is that facing east or west?
So this would be facing west. So this would be on the north side
Okay.
of Main Street, because they were coming this way, so towards us here. So this was such a momentous occasion that we actually had 6 members of a presidential cabinet come. So Grover Cleveland was president at this time, and to mark the occasion, 6 members of his cabinet came. And you're probably asking, how did we get 6 members of the presidential cabinet to come to Batavia for this? Well, Robert Maxwell, who was a Batavian native, was an assistant to the Postmaster General at this time, and put a little bug in their ears and said, hey, you should really go down and celebrate this, which was one reason why they really pushed Robert Morris throughout this and not the land company itself. So he talked to his superiors and was able to work it out. So we had John G. Carlisle, who was the Secretary of Treasury, Walter Gresham, Secretary of State, Daniel Lamont, Secretary of War, Wilson Bissell, the Postmaster General, Hillary Herbert, Secretary of the Navy, and Hope Smith, Secretary of the Interior.
Whoa, they had a bunch, yeah.
So we couldn't get Grover Cleveland, even though he was from Western New York, but we got the next best things, I guess. So.
All those people.
Yes, yes, Mary.
You probably know I don't hear that well, but I heard the word north, and when Mike asked direction, are those buildings north side?
So this is the north side over here.
Okay, so are any of those buildings?
Sorry, I'm getting myself confused. This is the
Thank
south
you.
side, that's the north side.
So those are the ones that were
Yes.
all urban renewal and not
So
that?
all-
Yeah, all them.
All of these buildings are gone.
Oh,
What is that?
well, it's quite a picture.
So, that actually says the Batavian, or Batavian, which was a newspaper at the time. That's why we get the online newspaper is called Batavian. So this, State Street is like right here. So there's several small alleyways in that section
Yeah.
that obviously no longer exist. But yes, you can kind of see the Methodist Church down here. This is on the other side of Bank Street. So I should have known my directions because I looked at this pretty closely, but I still get confused. And even a lot of stuff on the south side of this doesn't exist anymore either. So.
Most of them.
But yeah, so we got some major dignitaries. On top of that, Robert and S. Fisher Morris were in attendance. They were the great-grandsons of Robert Morris. And you had John J. Exile McBride, who, if you came to a presentation in March, you would know who I'm talking about, but other than that, no idea, and that's okay. So he was an Irish immigrant who eventually made his way to Buffalo. Was a member of the Fenian Uprising in 1866 and went into Canada, came back, and ended up being a leader for Irish home rule here in the United States,
Oh, yeah.
and even dined with prime ministers and all such. And somehow, when I was talking with a gentleman who was a descendant of his, we found out that he came to the dedication here of the Holland Land Office. So. A little extra, but his story is amazing on its own right, and he's buried in Brockport. So, so this drew people from all over, and some pretty memorable people in their own right. The opening prayer was done by the retired Reverend Stephen F. Ryan, who was from the Buffalo Diocese, and there was a poem written by John H. Yates, who was from Batavia, became a well-known poet, called Our Ancient Landmark. And there was other postings about it. On our right, this is one of the railway bills that you could see posted everywhere about coming to Batavia for this momentous occasion. Gives you even the rates traveling from places, and tells you all the members of the cabinet coming, because apparently at that time they were rock stars, and can we really recall who's in the cabinet today? And not so much. But on the left here was another poem written by a Bessie Chandler, which appeared in the Spirit of the Times on that day, which was another one of the newspapers. And I won't read the whole thing, but it's a pretty interesting take on it, and talking about the old girl at the land office and how they're happy she'll be around forever.
Oh, yeah,
So,
I read
We do have it posted in the hallway with our little display, so if you want to read it, you can. But it's a very touching little story of it. And then,
Well, Ryan, what were some of the rates for the railroad? I just curious, I don't know if you can read that from there or not. If you can't, that's fine.
Niagara Falls was $1. Lockport was $1. Looks like Leroy was 55 cents. Rochester was 75 cents.
Did Mary Richmond still had a controlling interest in the railroad at this time?
No.
No?
No.
She was sold out.
She was, once Dean died, that, because his interest still was, but not to the same extent.
Okay.
And I think at that point, it had expanded well beyond that.
Okay.
For 50 cents, you could travel into Batavia from the surrounding communities, and
That was still a good line, that was a good line.
but considering some of the places you could travel from, it might be easier to walk.
True.
Not as fast, but you save the money. But so this really was a really important event, and everybody kind of took part in this. My last slide here, a couple of souvenirs you could refer to. So we have both of these in our collection. So on the right here is a ticket to come to the dedication. And then this is a souvenir ribbon that you could get when you were here. Yes, Mary?
Which state park are they referring to?
So this is, the state park they're calling is the Blind School Park,
Oh,
because that was owned by the state.
Oh, I
So it was actually a state park, not a
okay.
state park that we
Right.
think of today, but yes. So that was often called, it didn't have a name at the time, so a lot of people called it the state park
Okay.
because it was owned by the state.
Makes sense.
So yeah, believe me, when I read that first too, I'm like, what are the, oh, okay. So it took me a second to remember, but let's see. So if you've looked at the front of the museum closely, up under the eaves of the pillars, you'll notice there's some tablets carved in
Yeah.
to dedication. So the first one was done on October 13th, 1894, and it's to Robert Morris, so that's the one on the far left. And as time has gone on, they've started to fill in ones. I don't know what the last one will be, we'll have to see, I guess, but those spots were actually originally windows that were filled in, and then these tablets were put in.
Ah,
So the first one was erected to Robert Morris and was unveiled by Walter Gresham, the Secretary of State. And eventually the parade makes its way up to the Blind School Park, and Secretary of Treasury Carlisle was the main speaker. And right as he's about to give his speech, a big swell comes from the sky and almost
so,
washes everybody out. Everybody stands there with umbrellas, and eventually it passes somewhat and they can finish the remarks. But I have here, which I'll recite for you, part of his address, and then I will sort of dive deeper into it. Because there's actually some things that are flat out wrong, but there's highlighting things that are very interesting, for sure. In 1804, the building which you are here to dedicate today to the memory of Robert Morris was erected, and for more than a third of a century, the titles to the homes of the people who now inhabit the counties of Erie, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Niagara, except the Indian reservations, in nearly all the counties of Orleans, Genesee, Wyoming, and Allegheny are prepared and executed within its walls. Thus, it is that nearly every home in the western part of the beautiful valley which suggested name of the river which flows through it is connected with the name of Robert Morris. So the part I'll highlight first is, yes, every home in western New York pretty much can trace back to this building. That's the part he got right. 1804, the building was not built in 1804. Where I think they get this date from is that Ellicott did erect land offices on this spot, but not this building, and they were not permanent structures. So they may be referring to the first land office that was built here in Batavia. Maybe not, I'm not exactly sure, but still, it wasn't this building. And they keep attaching Robert Morris's name to this. Now, yes, Robert Morris owned all of that land, but he had nothing to do with this building. He had sold the land to the land company. They're the ones that built this building. So it's not dedicating anything to the Holland Land Company. It's dedicating to Robert Morris. And around the turn of the century, you have the concept of American history is somewhat different than really how we imagine it today. There's this huge focus on our beginnings, which is the founding fathers, the Revolutionary era, and focusing on Americans and our greatness as we're going into a new century and where we've come from. So it being the Holland Land Company did not want to put too much importance on the Dutch. They wanted to put the name to somebody who was very influential in the beginning of the country. So that's why they talk about dedicating it to Robert Morris, even though he never saw this building, he never even saw the land that he bought. So it's reading it's a little irksome because the history of the building, they get it, but they attribute it to somebody who really didn't have anything to do with the building. But that's what they were really trying to build up the importance of it, connecting to the founding of America. And that was our connection. And even to this day, we still build up that connection. We have Robert Morris School. That's why it's named that. Even though, again, not so much a connection, but this playing out of Robert Morris is the importance. We still talk about him today, but more in the context of, well, he had the land before the land company. So not that he was so pivotal to the development part of it.
Nice one.
Brian, how did he own the land? Was that something from the war, or did he just?
So I'll give you the real brief rundown. So the area that we know, basically the western half of New York State, was disputed territory between Massachusetts and New York. So everything west of Seneca Lake. Massachusetts and New York actually signed a treaty over this. And Massachusetts was able to sell all that land. So they sell it first to Phelps and Gorham, but they default, so they only really establish themselves in the eastern third, basically Seneca Lake to the Genesee River. The western 2/3 go back to Massachusetts, and they're the ones that sell it to Robert Morris.
Okay.
And then it goes from him to the Holland Land Company. So it's just transactions. Morris, in this time period, was one of the largest land speculators in the country. He was the wealthiest man in the country, so he was now getting into a new venture, and he was buying up land everywhere. Not always with great success, because he ends up in debtor's prison by the end of this, and the fledgling United States has to change their tax code in order to get him out of prison.
Could you repeat that? The
So-
state of New York what?
So the United States actually changed their tax code so that Robert Morris could be let out of debtor's prison.
Oh my.
They had to because he gave over.
Basically, yes, as a thank you to him for paying for the revolution. So he goes from the richest man in the country. A few years later, can't pay off his debts. So he stretched himself too thin, is really what happens, and his investments don't pay off. This one, he gets his money because he sells it off for quite a big penny to the Holland Land Company, but that's how Morris ends up connected here with our area.
And how do they get it from the indigenous people? Was that the big
Don't
tree?
even ask.
Big
There's
tree?
still-
Tree?
Yes, the Big Tree Treaty.
Yeah.
So that was Morris's
Uh-huh.
insistence,
Okay.
And it's really signed between Morris and the Seneca, and then between the Seneca, Morris, and the land company. It's a big convoluted mess that kind of comes together, but it, yes, that's where that all connects.
Okay.
So.
Where did the Holland Land Office people get the money to buy the land?
So they were very wealthy bankers. At this time, the Dutch are the banking center of the world. Even though they don't have their own country, their money flows everywhere. In fact, many of the investors in the Holland Land Company had already invested in the United States during the Revolution. So the Dutch were strict competitors with the English at this time, so they were trying to support anybody who wasn't supporting the British. But at this time, or not at this time, during the 1790s, it was actually under French control under Napoleon. So there was not a Netherlands, there wasn't really even a Holland, but their money was still valuable as anybody else's. So, and they ended up making a lot of money off this venture, but they already had a significant income. So October 13th, 1894, our birthday, we had a massive party. Sorry we didn't have that kind of party this year, but it's important to remember how important this place was to the community, and still is, but that people recognize the importance of their local history, which we can't say was always the case. But there was a massive movement to keep this building and its importance to the community, its importance to West New York really growing. And we like to recognize that because those efforts are very difficult to undertake, especially back then and today. So the support that is given in the community is very much appreciated, and there is a long history of that happening, going back 130 years. So we are trying to continue the tradition, and we're hoping that we are building on it every single day. And we're excited to share our story because it really is a remarkable one. And this was just the beginning of a new chapter for this building, and one that is now longer than any other chapter in its history. So, right. Are there any other questions?
Did you invite the cabinet today?
You know what, I tried. They were all busy, I guess.
They're all busy.
Yeah, they were. I didn't have a friend in Congress right now,
So.
so.
You ain't gonna send us a letter? Something, happy birthday?
They got bigger things to worry about, I guess.
So, Brian, when they sold the land, the Holland Land Company, what was the amount you had to buy, or what did they sell it to another investor who then broke it up, or how did that?
So generally, the people buying land were farmers,
Okay.
and a lot was 120 acres on average, and that's what about people were buying for the most part, between 100 and 150, 60 acres. Now, you did have some individuals buy up huge pieces and then they would sell it off, but for the most part, it was individual sales. And those people then had usually about 5 years to pay things off, or at least get to a portion of it and keep showing progress. So a lot of people didn't complete that process, a lot more did. And that went on for about 40 years.
How
Just
long?
40. So by the 1840s, the land company has sold off any assets and they have gotten out of town. I've done other presentations on what we call the Land Office War of the late 1830s, which kind of hastens the demise of the Holland Land Company, but it was just a private transaction. It's no different than you or I going to the store, except they're buying 100 acres of land. And their deeds and their processes were just like any mortgage today, really. Not quite the same kind of terms, but the process was really the same. You put some down and you have so long to pay it off. So
Now, when you got that deed, or you were part owned, you were paying it off, did that go like to municipality for recording? Like, did it go to a county?
So-
Or is it just?
It was going to the land company,
Okay, so they kept the records?
yes. Then when we start, it's all Genesee County.
Okay.
There's only one county.
Mhm.
Then everybody starts to split off. So what they did is they actually ended up putting an office in each county. So each office maintained the records for that county, and here in Batavia had everything.
Okay.
This was the regional office.
All right.
But you have to remember, this is a private company, so they're not giving anything to the municipalities because they own the land.
Mhm.
Once the municipalities become established and the land company is relinquishing, then they start to go there. So once you paid it off, you were handling the municipality in another sense, basically your taxes. But your transaction was,
Okay, so you just had your paper, there was no deed recorded at the county court?
so the deed eventually gets sent to the counties.
Okay.
But they are maintained by the land office while it's in existence. Then things start to shift once the municipalities can actually handle that. So yes, your deed, is in the municipality now, they have it, it's recorded, but the first name on it is the land company, and they were the ones handling it, so. Because the land company is the one giving you the deed. So it's now in your possession, and then a copy just gets given to the municipality wherever you are. But yeah, so it was a private transaction, so no different than if I sell you land, and that's the transaction. So you have to think of it as because everybody likes to think of it as a government entity, which in a way it kind of was. It acted somewhat, but it really was just a corporation. So that just had a lot of power. So.
Now, did they have any impact on how the land was divided as the states moved out west? Because they sold them in lots of 160 acres.
So really, that's Ellicott's doing.
Okay,
He devises that lotting system.
okay.
And there is some impact, not directly per se, because as you get out to the Midwest, that is the United States government selling land.
Yeah.
But they use Ellicott's lotting system, which is meant to just make everything into perfect squares. So that's why when you look at the Midwest maps, they are just square after square after square, like
Yeah.
it's Ellicott's lotting system. They tweak it a little bit to fit what they're trying to do, so it's not a one-to-one, but they look at that and said, well, that works pretty good. Let's keep using it, so. But no, the land company is not directly influencing.
In influencing,
No.
yeah, but some of the stuff that they did, I understand.
It's seen as like the first real successful attempt at this. And it's used sort of as a model as they keep going farther west. So, because this was the original western frontier. So if it worked here, just keep going. And it seemed to keep working, so. Any other questions?
Thank you. I think it is a restart.
Do you have a book about Robert Morris at the store?
Not anything on him exclusively. He's kind of mentioned in things. Again, his role in this is not the focal point of the story, really. They make him the focal point on this day, but that's not really how it works.
Okay.
So, if you get anything with the land company, there's always, the first few chapters deal with Morris because he's involved in the sale. But after that, you're not going to hear much about him. So that's why I just kind of chuckle when I read these things and everybody putting emphasis on Morris. I'm like, he's not really the guy you want to put emphasis on. Because Joseph Ellicott's not mentioned in this at all.
And he's the one that's been
And he's the one that actually had the building built. So,
It was a PR stuff.
exactly, it was focusing on what people saw as the historical importance. And Joseph Ellicott was not that. Because he wasn't really, his name was out there, but his importance had kind of faded. And it was about getting back to exalting our founding fathers, and this was one way they did that. And this was one of our real only connections to do that here. Because we weren't early enough that we were involved in that part. So, though Alexander Hamilton did have dealings with the Holland Land Company, and so did Aaron Burr, while they were a member of New York State's government. So, there's another little connection. And Nathaniel Gorham, who was part of the Phelps-Gorham, he actually signed the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So there's a few more connections there, but.
Then we have the Gordon Patrick.
So, all right, well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight, celebrating our birthday with us. And you're welcome. So I hope to see you coming up. We have another guest speaker next Thursday,
Oh my.
November 7th. Robert Michael Block is coming all the way from Virginia
Wow.
to talk about the Battle of Rappahannock Station during the Civil War. He has written several books. He's a battlefield guide. He's been here before.
Yeah, okay.
And Rappahannock Station is one of the important battles in Upton's career. So
Okay.
there's a local connection to that. Just hold on one second, Mary. And November 22nd, you can already see some Christmas trees are up. That's the opening of Wonderland of Trees. It's a Friday night from 6 to 8:30. We are going to have more than 30 trees up. We're going to have music by the DSP Jazz Trio. We are going to have food from the Alabama Hotel, Batavia's Original, and desserts by Sweet Ending from Attica. So there's going to be a ton of stuff. The basket raffle will be starting,
Yeah.
which we're planning on having probably close to 60 baskets. So there will be a ton of stuff, fun stuff going on. Then in December, we've got more concerts. December 6th, and these are all Friday nights at 7. December 6th, we have Genesee Symphony Orchestra, brass quartet's going to play. Then the following night, Mike here will be doing a Christmas show for us on Friday.
Guitar.
Classical guitar on Friday the 13th, so we'll be excited about that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the next one, we have a flute quartet from the Symphony Orchestra playing. So we got a lot going on. There's a ton of other stuff. We're going to do some movie nights, some craft things for the kids and everything. So it is going to be jam-packed in November and December here. So
Yes.
I hope you all come and enjoy us. Yes, Mary?
What is the date of the man who's coming from Virginia? What date?
November 7th.
7.
Yes.
Okay,
It's a Thursday night.
all right.
You have one of those flyers down, don't you?
You'll be getting all the information. We're just finalizing some things for November, so things will be going out very shortly. So check the Penny Saver, the paper, Batavian, Facebook, our newsletter, our website. We're everywhere. So, all right. Well, everybody have a good evening, and we hope to see you soon.